They say we live in a dog-eat-dog world, but cannibalism is not just limited to dogs. Eating your own kind is pretty widespread in the animal kingdom. The snakes are no exception to that. Cobras, in particular, regularly consume other cobras. But why do they do it? We'll find out today.
Although a snake would eat literally anything, they can famously devour the most giant animals, from cows and pigs to even eating themselves on occasion. Yeah, pretty crazy, but we'll get into that later. Snakes can eat anything because their head and jaws have adapted and evolved that way. They can swallow objects bigger than their heads, as you just saw, but they can also eat each other. Take, for instance, this Javan spitting cobra up against a mighty king cobra. The king cobra here is about 4.8 meters long and has a considerable advantage over the other snake. Still, the Javan cobra tries to strike at his predator, but that doesn't go too well for it. The king cobra nabs its tail, but because his head is free, he tries to bite the bigger cobra a few times. Not to be deterred, the king cobra keeps trying until it gets the little snake's head in its mouth. After it repositions itself comfortably, he does give up, and the king cobra wins. As sad as it is for the little snake, it ultimately comes down to predator versus prey in the jungle. Usually it's out of desperation that snakes eat other snakes. Snakes are opportunistic hunters, and when hunger comes calling, there's no telling what they'll do. Mercy is not something shown very often in the animal kingdom. King snake has no venom, but it is powerful without it, considering how young this rattlesnake is. Only a few months old and with no experience, this rattlesnake will face a fierce challenge. The king snake waits for the right moment. The prey simply cannot escape. When the rattlesnake moves its head ever so slightly to the left, the king snake strikes like lightning. A struggle ensues, but he wraps himself around his prey pound for pound. King snakes are among the most powerful constrictors in the world, and a worthy opponent for one of the world's most dangerous venomous snakes. He squeezes the life out of the young one and begins his meal shortly after. Eating another snake is not an easy process, especially when the prey is longer than the predator. You've seen snakes eat cows and pigs, and while they're certainly bigger than the snake, they're not longer. A snake's body can accommodate for width, but not necessarily length. That's not to say it's entirely impossible for smaller snakes to eat larger ones. King cobras average at 10 to 12 feet in length, while pythons clock in at an impressive 15 to 20 feet. But that wasn't a problem for this king cobra, who was devouring a python before locals in the Philippines found it and clubbed it to death. When the locals cut the venomous cobra open, they found the python swallowed whole in its stomach. It's true. Some snakes are able to ingest other snakes that equal or exceed their own length. But the prey has to fit into the stomach. There is a limit to the length of their gut, and it definitely can't extend into their tail, which is solid with muscle. And the prey can't be left hanging out of their mouths either. I mean, imagine leaving the tip of a pizza just hanging out of your mouth and walking around like that all day. No, there is a better way, of course. Snakes will throw their prey into waves to decrease its length and pack it into the space available, like folding a scarf to put into a closet. But what happens when a snake eats itself? Yeah, we promised you we'd come back to that. Snakes are cold-blooded, which means they need external sources of heat, like the sun or a lamp if they're kept indoors. But if they get too hot, it confuses and disorients them. They also get a ramped-up metabolism, causing them to have a false sense of hunger and a desire to eat the first thing they see. So, if they see their tails, they might mistake it for prey and attack. Remember how we said there's no mercy shown in the wild? Yeah, that includes snakes that are pregnant. In this video, at first the male cobra seems to be overly persistent in pursuing the female, but the female is carrying the eggs of another male king cobra. When he senses a rival's offspring, his intentions go from mating to straight-up murder. At this time, the female cobra is not entirely immune to the venom of her own kind. He probably knew that because he squeezes his jaw around her and pumps the venom into her bloodstream. She puts up a fight for a while, but it doesn't take long for the poison to take effect. 45 minutes later, the queen is dead. So as you might have guessed, it isn't just about being hungry and wanting food. Snakes can kill other snakes for a variety of different reasons. It's actually quite odd and relatively rare for a male snake to eat a female of his own species out of spite. In fact, studies have shown that a majority of cannibalism events go down with a male eating another male. In this case, it's less about food and more about competing with the alpha in the group. Somebody spotted this overly complicated mess during a hike in Orlando, Florida. It's a large snake eating another large snake, while two other snakes roam about. Other snakes seem to be giving the giant snake moral support as he eats the prey snake. But why do they need to be right on top of the predator is baffling. They eventually move away and scurry into the bushes, leaving him to enjoy his meal. But for some reason, this snake starts to spit its prey out. Whatever the reason, one thing is for sure. The hiker didn't expect the prey snake to come out with food of his own between his jaws, and the snake is still alive. Can you imagine being that far down a snake's mouth and still being alive, let alone going about your typical day just after? But why would a snake throw up its meal? When a snake spits out its meal immediately after ingestion, but before the food makes its way to its stomach, it's called regurgitation.
Disgusting.
This is actually quite a common response if they're full from a previous meal, or if they're stressed. But what on earth could stress out a snake? Another predator, for one. Stress triggers a natural reaction in a snake, which is to relieve itself of the bulk of its meal in case it needs to flee. In the wild, a snake would regurgitate its recently eaten food to direct energy away from digestive function and put it toward escaping a predator. A less common cause of regurgitation is if a snake ingests a meal that is too large for him to handle, which is likely what happened here. It occurs when the snake is almost half out of the snake's mouth, which makes this a partial regurgitation. Seems like this guy bit off more than he could chew. Sometimes, snakes unknowingly also do us, humans, a huge favor. Like this spitting cobra in Mozambique eating a puff adder. Puff adders account for more deaths than any other snake in Africa. They're ambush hunters, with venom so toxic it causes tissue damage and death. Lucky for the locals, this snake swallowed the adder whole. Great! Now all they'll have to worry about is the spitting cobra that managed to defeat a puff adder.